Clara sat by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass in slow, silver rivers, feeling a strange emptiness that she could not name, a hollow that had grown quietly over months, maybe years, in the life she shared with David, her husband, who was kind, reliable, and steady, the kind of man everyone admired for his patience and gentleness, yet somehow, the spark between them had dimmed, replaced by polite smiles and small talk that didn't reach the heart anymore. She remembered the early days of their marriage, how David used to make her laugh until her cheeks ached, how he held her hand in crowded rooms like the world didn't exist except for them, how he whispered her name like it was a secret meant only for her, and now, sitting alone while the gray light of late afternoon filled the room, she realized those moments felt distant, like a story someone else had lived, and it frightened her because she loved him deeply but could not shake the loneliness that had crept into their home like a quiet shadow, and she wondered if he felt it too, if he noticed the way she sometimes stared into space, lost in thoughts she couldn't speak aloud. The phone rang, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to intrude into her quiet contemplation. And it was Daniel, a colleague she had met a few weeks ago at a work event, someone who had a way of listening that made her feel lighter, someone whose presence was like a gentle breeze that stirred memories of being seen, truly seen, in ways that she had almost forgotten. She hesitated before answering, feeling a flutter of guilt that she could not name, but curiosity won, and when Daniel's cheerful voice greeted her, she felt a warmth that surprised her, a sense of connection that had been missing for far too long. And as they talked about work, about small frustrations and fleeting joys, Clara found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in months, and she realized that she had missed this feeling, the feeling of someone noticing her mind and heart, not just the routines of daily life. After the call ended, she sat silently, staring at the raindrops racing each other down the glass, thinking about the strange pull she felt toward Daniel, a pull she had never expected, a pull that was exciting and dangerous all at once, and she asked herself if it was fair to feel this way while loving David so deeply, and she couldn't answer, because the truth was, she was confused, torn between loyalty and longing, between what she knew was right and what her heart seemed to crave, and she wondered if anyone had ever felt this way, if anyone had ever been caught between love and desire, between the comfort of familiarity and the thrill of being seen again. The next day, Clara found herself remembering small things about Daniel, his easy smile, the way he listened without judgment, the light in his eyes when he noticed something beautiful in the world or in a person, and she felt a twinge of guilt, because David was right there, preparing breakfast, humming softly, offering her a cup of tea with the same tenderness he had always shown, and yet, the memory of Daniel lingered, bright and insistent, like a candle flickering in a dark room, and Clara wondered what it meant about her own heart, whether longing for someone else made her a bad person, or if it was simply proof that she had not forgotten how to feel, how to crave connection, how to be fully alive. That evening, David came home, tired but smiling, carrying flowers he had picked on his way, and Clara felt her chest tighten with affection and guilt all at once. She kissed him on the cheek and hugged him, feeling the familiar warmth of his body against hers, and she wished she could tell him everything. But she also feared that speaking aloud the flutter of emotions that Daniel had stirred would shatter the delicate balance of their life together, and so she stayed silent, letting the words dissolve in her mind, and she noticed how David seemed content, how he laughed at her small jokes, how he listened when she spoke, and she wanted to stay in that moment forever, yet she could not forget the pull of another presence, one that had stirred feelings she had almost buried under the weight of routine and responsibility, and she realized that love was complicated, that it could coexist with longing, and that sometimes, the human heart wandered even when the mind knew where it belonged, and she felt a mix of fear, hope, and guilt, an emotional cocktail that left her restless and sleepless that night. Lying in bed, David asleep beside her, Clara stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns in the shadows cast by the moonlight, thinking of how quickly life could shift in small, almost imperceptible ways, how a chance encounter, a shared conversation, a fleeting smile, could open doors to emotions that felt both dangerous and exhilarating, and she wondered if she was strong enough to resist temptation, or if she would succumb to the pull of curiosity and desire, the allure of being noticed and understood in ways that had been missing from her own home, and she realized that this was the beginning of a story she could not yet understand, a story that would test her love, her loyalty, her courage, and her ability to forgive herself for feelings that were natural yet complicated, and she felt both terrified and alive, knowing that the days to come would challenge her in ways she had never imagined, forcing her to confront the fragility of trust, the depth of longing, and the complexities of the human heart. And as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Clara made a silent promise to herself to navigate the emotional storm with honesty and care, to cherish the love she had while acknowledging the stirrings that made her human, and to face the choices ahead with courage, knowing that one decision, one moment of weakness or clarity, could alter everything she had built with David. And she drifted into uneasy sleep, the rain still falling outside, mirroring the uncertainty and quiet turbulence that had begun in her heart, marking the start of a journey that would test love, desire, and the delicate balance between loyalty and longing. In the days that followed, Clara found herself thinking about Daniel more than she cared to admit. Each memory of his smile, his laugh, and the way he listened carefully to her words lingering in her mind like a song she could not stop playing. And at work, every interaction with him seemed charged with a quiet energy, a subtle connection that was innocent yet undeniably stirring. And she noticed how he always seemed to notice little things about her that no one else did, like the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, or the way her eyes lit up when she talked about a project she cared about, and each observation made her heart beat faster, filling her with a warmth that both excited and frightened her, because she loved David and never wanted to hurt him. Yet she could not deny the thrill of feeling seen in a way that had been absent from her life for far too long, and she began to question her own heart, wondering if it was natural to feel drawn to someone else while being married, and whether longing for connection outside her marriage made her ungrateful or simply human. And at the same time, she felt guilty for enjoying these thoughts, knowing that even fleeting admiration for Daniel could be dangerous. But she could not stop herself from noticing how kind he was, how genuinely interested he seemed in her life, and how his laughter made the office feel lighter, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. And one afternoon, Daniel asked if she wanted to grab a coffee during a break, and though she hesitated for only a moment, curiosity and a desire for companionship won, and they walked to a small cafe nearby, talking about books, movies, and memories from their childhoods, finding similarities in the things that mattered most to them. And Clara was surprised at how easy it felt to share pieces of herself with him, pieces she hadn't realized she was missing, and she noticed how comfortable she felt in his presence, like she could breathe without trying. And when they laughed at a silly joke, her chest felt lighter, and she realized how much she had missed that kind of joy in her life. And when the conversation turned to work frustrations, Daniel listened intently, nodding and offering gentle advice, and Clara felt a connection so strong that she almost forgot where she was, almost forgot about the commitments and promises she had made, almost forgot the very person she had gone home to each evening. And yet, she reminded herself of David, of their shared history, of the late-night talks and the warmth of his hands around hers, and she felt torn between the comfort of her marriage and the excitement of this new bond, this unexpected connection that seemed to awaken parts of her she had neglected. And when they parted at the cafe, Daniel walked her to her car, and their hands brushed lightly, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her, leaving her breathless. And Clara quickly pulled away, chastising herself for letting the thrill linger. And yet, she couldn't shake the memory of that touch, the way it had made her heart race, and she wondered if he had felt it too, if he had noticed the unspoken electricity between them. And she drove home in silence, thinking about the boundaries she had unknowingly crossed, and how easy it was to slip into emotional closeness without realizing the consequences. And when she arrived, David was in the kitchen, humming softly while preparing dinner, and the normalcy of his presence both comforted and saddened her, because she loved him deeply but could not ignore the stirrings that Daniel had awakened. And she realized that she was caught in a delicate balance between loyalty and desire, and the tension made her restless, unable to eat or focus, her mind replaying snippets of conversation and stolen glances. And that night, she lay awake beside David, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, thinking about Daniel, and the way a few shared words and a fleeting connection could make her feel alive in ways she hadn't anticipated. And she worried that if she allowed these feelings to grow, she might risk everything she held dear. But she could not simply turn off her emotions, could not make the human heart obey logic alone. And as she stared at the ceiling, tracing shadows cast by the moonlight, She wondered how much longer she could keep these feelings buried, how long she could remain faithful in thought if not entirely in spirit, and she realized that the next encounter with Daniel would be crucial, that every conversation, every smile, every moment of attention carried a weight she had never considered. And she feared that one wrong step, one lapse in judgment, could unravel the life she had built with David, and yet, a small voice inside whispered that feeling alive, feeling seen, was not a sin, that it was part of being human, part of the complexity of love. And she felt herself pulled in two directions, yearning for connection while fearing the consequences, and as days passed, Daniel's presence continued to weave itself into her routine, small gestures like a thoughtful message or a quick joke brightening her day, and she noticed how her mind wandered during quiet moments, recalling his laughter or the sparkle in his eyes, and she caught herself imagining conversations that had not yet happened, wondering how it would feel to share more, to lean on someone who seemed to understand the hidden corners of her heart, and though guilt gnawed at her, there was a strange exhilaration in the awareness that she could still feel passion, curiosity, and attraction, emotions that had been dormant in the comfort of marriage, and each encounter, each glance, each word exchanged with Daniel became a test of her self-control, a challenge to reconcile her love for David with the undeniable connection forming elsewhere, and she found herself analyzing every interaction, every smile, every pause in conversation, searching for meaning and reassurance that she was not doing wrong, trying to understand why her heart could feel two ways at once, and she realized that the human heart was not simple, that emotions were rarely neat or contained, and that love did not always follow rules. And as she walked home from the office one rainy evening, umbrella in hand, she thought about the path her life had taken, about the distance that had crept into her marriage, about the way loneliness had created space for this new connection, and she felt a shiver of fear and excitement, knowing that her choices mattered more than ever, that her next actions could either heal or harm, and when she opened the door to her home, David greeted her with warmth, a smile, and a gentle question about her day, and she realized how much she valued his presence, how much she loved him, and yet, she could not deny the pull of longing for another kind of connection, one that felt new and intense, and she knew that the coming days would test her patience, her morals, and her ability to navigate emotions that were both natural and complicated, and as she lay awake that night, listening to the soft patter of rain against the window, she thought about Daniel, about the way he had made her feel alive again, and she realized that the quiet drift she had felt in her marriage was not the end of love but a beginning of understanding, that longing could coexist with loyalty, and that the journey ahead would require courage, honesty, and reflection, because her heart had awakened to the complexities of human emotion, to the delicate dance between commitment and curiosity, and she knew that the next encounter with Daniel, whether brief or prolonged, would shape the story of her heart, testing her resolve and teaching her what it truly meant to love, to desire, and to navigate the intricate, often messy landscape of connection, trust, and temptation, and as sleep finally claimed her, she realized that life was never simple, that love was never without challenge, and that the human heart was capable of feeling deeply, dangerously, beautifully, and that she was only beginning to understand what it meant to be alive in the midst of longing and loyalty. Clara could feel the tension building in her chest like a storm waiting to break as the days with Daniel continued, each conversation at work carrying an intensity she hadn't anticipated, and every small interaction made her heart race with excitement and fear all at once. And that evening, when David had stayed late at the office, leaving the house quiet and still, she found herself alone with thoughts she could no longer contain, thinking about Daniel's smile, his kind eyes, the way he seemed to truly understand her, and a part of her wondered if loneliness had made her crave this connection more than she should, but another part, the part that longed to feel alive, urged her to acknowledge it, to not ignore the spark that had ignited inside her. She was working on reports at the dining table when her phone buzzed, and it was Daniel, asking if she was free to talk, and though a flicker of guilt crossed her mind, curiosity and the need for companionship won, and she answered, her voice slightly trembling, betraying the nervous excitement she tried to hide. And as their conversation unfolded, it began innocently with work frustrations, shared stories, and casual laughter, but gradually they drifted into more personal territory, speaking of hopes, fears, past regrets, and the subtle loneliness that sometimes shadowed their lives. and Clara found herself admitting things she had kept hidden even from herself, things about feeling unseen, disconnected, and in need of someone who understood her heart, and Daniel listened, truly listened. His responses gentle, thoughtful, and comforting, and she realized that in his presence, she felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in months, perhaps even years, and the conversation stretched late into the evening, the outside world fading away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of shared understanding, laughter, and vulnerability. As the rain fell softly outside, the room dimly lit by the glow of the desk lamp, Clara felt a surge of emotion she had not expected, a blend of relief, excitement, and fear, and before she fully understood her own impulses, she spoke words that were too honest, too raw, revealing feelings she had not intended to share, and Daniel responded with warmth, encouragement, and a quiet gentleness that made her heart pound, and in that suspended moment, as the emotional intimacy deepened, Clara leaned toward him, drawn by a longing she could not deny, a need to feel the closeness and understanding that had been missing in her life, and when their hands brushed over the phone as they reached for a document together, it felt electric, a shock of connection that left her breathless and trembling, and before she could stop herself, she acted on the impulse that had been quietly building, and they shared a brief, gentle kiss, a tender touch of lips that carried all the emotions they had been holding back, and the moment was over in seconds, yet it stretched endlessly in Clara's mind, a turning point she could not take back, a mistake that had happened in the quiet of her loneliness and longing. Immediately, guilt flooded her, heavier than any emotion she had felt in years, pressing down on her chest, making her feel weak, terrified, and confused all at once, and she pulled away, heart racing, voice shaking as she apologized, trying to explain that it had been a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment brought on by the emptiness she had felt at home, but Daniel, understanding yet equally concerned, assured her that they could step back, that boundaries could be restored, and that the choice to continue in friendship without crossing lines again was theirs to make, and Clara felt relief, yet the weight of what had happened remained, a secret that now sat between her and David, waiting to be faced, and as she hung up, she stared at the phone, her mind spinning with questions, fears, and regrets, wondering how she could ever reconcile this lapse with the love she felt for David, wondering if she had permanently altered the course of her life, wondering how she could face him without shattering the trust they had built, and as she walked into the quiet living room, she saw David sitting on the sofa, reading, completely unaware of the storm that had raged in her heart just moments before, and she wanted to collapse, to cry, to run, but instead, she forced herself to compose, to act normally, to preserve the fragile balance of their life together, knowing that even the smallest hint of tension or distance would raise questions she was not yet ready to answer. That night, lying beside David, hearing the steady rhythm of his breathing, Clara felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, love, guilt, longing, and fear mingling inside her like a whirlwind, and she thought about the choices she had made, the emotional bond she had allowed to form with someone else, and how quickly a single impulsive action could threaten the life she cherished, and she realized that love was complicated, that desire and loyalty could exist in tension, that humans were capable of mistakes even when intentions were pure, and she vowed silently that she would confront the consequences, face the truth, and do everything possible to protect the love she had with David, while also understanding the parts of herself that had been neglected, the emotional needs that had been unmet, the longing for connection that had almost led her astray, and she knew that the next day, every word, every glance, every action would carry weight, that the decision to speak, to confess, or to hide would shape the course of her marriage, and she felt both terrified and determined, realizing that life was rarely simple, that hearts were complicated, and that love required courage, honesty, and the strength to face one's own flaws and mistakes. And as dawn approached, Clara stared at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, thinking of David, of the life they had built, of the family they shared, and of the mistake she had just made, knowing that it could either destroy everything or, if handled with care and openness, teach her the depths of forgiveness, trust, and human vulnerability. And she understood that the coming days would be a test of her character, her love, and her resilience, that she would need to confront temptation, acknowledge her own emotional fragility, and find a way to restore balance in a heart that had been stirred by longing, desire, and connection, and she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, yet also a strange sense of clarity, knowing that while mistakes could not be undone, the choices she made afterward could define the strength of her marriage, the authenticity of her love, and the capacity for growth, healing, and understanding. And as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, she realized that her heart had been shaken, her life had been challenged, and that the road ahead would demand honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the consequences of the human heart in all its complexity, and that the next chapter, the confrontation and confession to David, would be the true test of love, trust, and the resilience of their bond, marking a turning point in Clara's life that would shape everything she held dear, and teaching her, in the quietest, most emotional way, that love was never simple, desire was never straightforward, and the courage to face one's own mistakes was the first step toward redemption and the restoration of a life built on trust, care, and the enduring power of human connection. The morning after Clara's moment of weakness, the house felt heavier than usual, each corner echoing with unspoken tension as she moved quietly from room to room, afraid to meet David's eyes, afraid to see the subtle hints of suspicion or disappointment that might already be there, and yet, she could not avoid the truth any longer, because her heart was restless, pounding with guilt and anxiety, reminding her that what had happened could not be erased, that secrets had a weight heavier than silence, and as she prepared breakfast, her hands trembled slightly while she poured coffee and buttered toast, thinking about how to begin the conversation, what words could convey the complexity of her emotions without causing irreparable harm, and she realized that honesty, though terrifying, was the only path forward if she wanted to salvage the love that had been tested. Because hiding or pretending would only make the bond weaker, leaving both of them vulnerable to misunderstandings and resentment. And when David entered the kitchen, still yawning, hair-tousled, the familiar warmth of his presence both comforted and tormented her, reminding her of the life they had built together, the quiet nights of shared laughter, the afternoons spent in comfort and ease, the small gestures of love that had accumulated into a deep, steady affection, and she knew that, confessing her emotional lapse, the fleeting connection she had allowed to form with Daniel, would hurt him, perhaps deeply, yet she also understood that suppressing the truth would poison their relationship in a slower, more destructive way, and so she took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice, and began to speak, carefully, gently, telling him that she had felt lonely, disconnected, and unseen, that she had made a mistake in allowing herself to form an emotional bond outside their marriage, and that it had never been a reflection of her love for him, but rather a symptom of her own unmet emotional needs, of her vulnerability and desire to feel alive and noticed. And as she spoke, David listened quietly, his expression unreadable at first, and Clara feared the worst, imagining anger, betrayal, or the cold silence that might follow. Yet slowly, he reached out, taking her hand with a firmness that steadied her, and said that while he was hurt, he appreciated her honesty, that they could work through the pain together, that their marriage, their love, was worth fighting for. And at that moment, Clara felt a mix of relief and lingering guilt, realizing that acknowledging mistakes could be a painful yet healing process, that vulnerability could bring couples closer if handled with care, that love was not only about joy but also about resilience and forgiveness. And they spent hours talking, sharing feelings they had long avoided, discussing the distance that had crept into their relationship, the moments of loneliness that had gone unspoken, the emotional gaps that had allowed outside influences to feel tempting. And with each conversation, the walls between them began to crumble, replaced by understanding, compassion, and a renewed determination to connect on a deeper level. And Clara felt a wave of gratitude and love for David, seeing not only his pain but also his commitment to work through it with her, and she realized that the human heart, while fragile, was capable of incredible strength, capable of forgiving, rebuilding, and learning, and that the mistakes they faced together could become a source of growth rather than destruction. And as the days passed, Clara devoted herself to nurturing their relationship, listening more intently, expressing her appreciation, and finding ways to reconnect in small, meaningful gestures that reminded both of them why they had fallen in love, while also setting clear boundaries with Daniel, acknowledging the emotional closeness that had developed but keeping it strictly professional and friendly. And she learned to navigate her feelings with honesty, self-awareness, and care, understanding that attraction and curiosity were natural but must be balanced with loyalty and commitment. And over time, the tension that had threatened to unravel her marriage gradually eased, replaced by a deeper sense of intimacy and connection with David, strengthened by the trials they had faced together, and Clara discovered that true love was not perfect or without challenges, but resilient, capable of weathering mistakes and misunderstandings when met with courage, communication, and empathy, and that while temptation could stir the heart, conscious choices, honesty, and devotion could guide it back to what mattered most. And as they sat together one quiet evening, sharing a cup of tea and watching the sunset through the window, Clara felt a profound sense of relief and contentment, knowing that their bond had endured, that they had confronted the shadow of human imperfection, and that the experience had brought them closer, more understanding of each other's vulnerabilities, desires, and needs, and she understood that love required continual effort, trust, and willingness to face uncomfortable truths, and that the capacity to forgive oneself and one's partner was as important as the passion and joy that first brought two hearts together, and she felt gratitude for the second chance they had given each other, for the strength to rebuild, and for the realization that even mistakes could become lessons in the art of loving deeply and responsibly. And as she leaned against David, feeling the warmth and steady rhythm of his heart, she reflected on the journey that had led them to this renewed closeness, understanding that human connections were complex, that hearts could wander but also return, that mistakes did not define a person or a marriage if met with honesty and courage, and that love, in its truest form, was about navigating challenges, embracing vulnerability, and choosing each other every day. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Clara knew that they had emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of the preciousness of their shared life, and that the lessons of longing, temptation, regret, and confession had all converged to teach them the depth, fragility, and resilience of love, leaving Clara with a sense of hope, gratitude, and a renewed commitment to nurture and cherish the bond that had been tested but ultimately endured, proving that even in the face of a shocking mistake, hearts could heal, relationships could grow, and love could triumph when approached with honesty, patience, and courage. And as the night settled in, Clara felt the weight lift from her chest, replaced by a quiet joy, a sense of belonging, and a renewed awareness that love, though tested, was worth every effort, every conversation, every tear shed and forgiven, and that together, she and David could continue to build a life of trust, intimacy, and shared understanding, stronger than ever before.